and I am your 7-Minute Sensei. This is where I attempt to explain everything that you need to know in 7 minutes or less. Today's topic is economics, and this is a test review for the Utah State Strands and Standards for Economics. Here we go. First thing you need to know is that to sign in and register for this exam, you must go to precisionexams.com/Utah. You could take a sample test, and that code for the sample test is date CRHF. If you would like to take the exam, if you're ready to take the exam and I'm ready to give you the exam, if you're in period A1, you need to use the code YDBL3XMN. That's for period A1. If you're in period A2, you should use the code YDJG3BHX. Once you do that and I approve that you take the exam, then you're pretty much in business. Let's go ahead and take a look at the exam. So the way that you could prepare for this exam is to review the state strands and standards. So let's take a look at them. I think it's easiest if you begin with the end in mind. In other words, in this particular exam, you will have the ability to earn a total of 60 points, 60. Total questions, 58. So there are quite a few questions. If you pace yourself and you give yourself 1 minute per question, that would be 58 minutes. Now, I know many of you will do fine and some of you will be done in 30 minutes, 40 minutes. But I would pace yourself and make sure that you are using good logic when selecting your answer, okay? I'm not suggesting that you second guess yourself, but start by eliminating the obviously incorrect answers, unless you are confident that maybe one of the answers you see is the correct answer. But be careful of those questions that might say all the above are correct, okay, because that could be the right answer as well. In this exam, look to strand 3. Strand 3 has 20 possible points. So 1/3 of all your points will be earned in strand 3. The next large categories are strand 2 at 17 and then strand 1. So I think, it's going to be important for you to really understand strands 1, 2, and 3 with an underscore on strand 3. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Moving on to strand 1. In strand 1, okay, first let's review the course description. In this class, you'll learn that economics is a social science. It studies how people will satisfy their unlimited wants and needs with scarce resources. You'll learn about different characteristics of an economy in the United States and how the U.S. functions in a world and in a global economy. You'll learn methods of applying economics in your own personal life, in your life and in business. This is an elective core that you can take either for a half credit hour of social studies or a half credit hour of CTE, or career and technology education. And if you're aware of that, you may need the CTE credit, you may need the economics credit. It's important to know that. Okay, moving on to strand 1. In strand 1, we learn that the first strand is about how you must understand economic conditions of scarcity. That is the whole basis of economics, and how individuals, governments, societies need to make some difficult choices sometimes on how to satisfy unlimited wants and needs using a limited amount of resources. So you'll learn things like in standard 1, you need to be able to define economics. One way you can define economics is to simply say economics is a social science and it is the science of choice. It is how people decide how to allocate scarce resources. You need to understand the difference between a good and a service. Now, good, I could be selling I could be selling some product. I could be selling this bottle of water. That is a good. Now, service is if I had a cleaning service, then that's my service. Goods and services. Next, let's look at standard 2. Compare and contrast the concepts of opportunity cost and trade-off cost and use the production possibility curve. Now remember, the production possibility curve is given scarce or limited resources, what would you produce, right? And often we refer back to the speech about guns or butter, or guns and butter. And the trade-offs, this quote came from a time of war, and a lot of money had to be put towards military equipment and supplies. And so the trade-offs were, do we provide more money for the military, or do we provide more food, agricultural products and so forth for the people? Okay, opportunity cost. Opportunity cost is defined as the cost of your next best alternative. So if you choose to go and watch a movie with your friends versus studying for this exam, the price that you may pay could be a grade. Okay, so it's the cost of your second best alternative. So not the movie, but maybe studying for this test, and what you're giving up, maybe a better grade and so forth. That's opportunity cost. Now, a trade-off is similar to an opportunity cost, but the trade-off, think of a trade-off like an opportunity cost, but it doesn't get down to the very tangible dollars and cents. Okay, so it's like, trade-off. It would be like, do I spend time with my friends, or do I spend time with my family? What are the trade-offs, the pros and cons, if you will? Okay, next, as far as creating that production possibility curve, we already talked about that. Another example might be, you might have 10 acres, and how much are you going to allocate towards planting corn versus planting pumpkins, something like that. Okay, so you only have 10 acres. You have a fixed amount of land, resources, and so you can only do so much, and you've got to decide how to allocate that land. Moving on to strand number 3, or standard 3, you need to list the basic economic questions. These are 3 basic economic questions. The first is, what will you produce? The second is, how will you produce it? And the third economic question is, for whom? What, how, and for whom will you produce? Okay. You need to define the difference between a traditional economy, a command economy, market economy, and a mixed economy. So a traditional economy goes back to the days of nomads and villages. The traditional economy was, you would barter and you would trade. That would be the tradition. I've got some corn, you've got some fish, or some kind of other item that I want. We're going to barter and we're going to trade. That's a traditional economy. Now, the command economy, we associate the command economy as centrally planned economy. A command economy is, typically you think command economy as a communist or a socialist type of government, an autocracy, where some small group makes final decisions for the entire society. Command, control, command economy. Whereas a market economy, a true free market economy, which doesn't exist, by the way, but a free market economy, a market economy, it pretty much is laissez-faire, meaning that let the markets decide. If you want to spend this much money on this, and you want to charge this much money on this, that's fine. But the difference is there's nobody centrally planning things. And so if society or a group of people decide the most important thing to be produced right now is, say, you want to produce a recreational center, then you let the market decide. Whereas in a centrally planned command economy, it's the government that's going to decide. Yeah, we want to create a recreation center. Free market economy is you let the consumers decide. Will they pay the money for it? And then finally, a mixed economy. And that's where you see most economies today are mixed. They're not pure market economies or command economies. They're mixed economies. There's a blending of all of these. So remember those three economic questions. Think about which countries use different economic systems. When you think of a command economy, there's not very many command economies today. Again, you'll see a lot of mixed economies, but if you think of North Korea, our suspicion at least, because it's a very closed society, we don't know much about them, but we believe they would be an example of a command economy. Everything is centrally planned. A small group of people or an individual makes the final decisions. Otherwise, most are going to be mixed economies. Strand number 2. In strand 2, you need to learn about goods and services, these resources, voluntary exchange. Voluntary exchange is all about the free market. It suggests that you as a buyer understand what your options are and you voluntarily give money to somebody for something that they voluntarily sell to you because they feel like they're getting a good deal in return. Standard 1, define markets and explain how they allocate resources. Well, there is something we call the circular flow. And in the circular flow, you go to work, you earn money from the factory, from the business, you get a paycheck, you take that paycheck, you pay your bills, you have to do your grocery shopping, you're buying a home which a builder built, and you're paying your taxes, and we have a circular flow of goods and services, scarce resources. We go through a circular flow. Next, performance skills. You need to know in your performance skills that you need to know these concepts. What is the difference between a household, or what is a household / consumer? What exactly defines a government, business, producers, and so forth. In Standard 2, we look at the topic of incentives. Are you sufficiently incentivized? Are you motivated? Do you feel like you have enough incentives? And those are external to me, but let's say, do you have enough incentive to get a good grade on this state exam? Same place in the workplace. Do people have enough incentive to go out and try to find work and do work and pay for themselves? Or do you not have enough incentives, and maybe they might even have a disincentive and not work? Barriers to entry. When we're looking at barriers to entry, you're looking typically at an oligopoly. And those oligopolies are, I like to use the example of road construction companies, highway construction companies. There are only a few number of companies that have the capital, that have the resources necessary to be a construction company that can build an expansion of I-15. You and I can't just walk out and say, okay, I'm going to buy a truck and hire a bunch of people and we're going to go out and bid on this freeway. We don't have that expertise, for one. Okay. There are certain barriers to entries, like the cost of starting up a business, the amount of expertise that's required. Somebody may dominate a market by so much that it's just hard to break into that market. In Standard 3, we need to know about the law of supply and demand and how prices are determined. The law of supply and demand, think of the demand curve as a downward sloping curve, and there is an inverse relationship between price and demand. So on that curve, on the left-hand side of the curve, on the y-axis, you have price. Okay, so that's price on the y-axis. And then quantity is on the x-axis. When price goes down, quantity demanded goes up, and vice versa. So there's this inverse relationship. If the price goes up, or I just said that one, the opposite then would be if the price goes down, then quantity demanded goes up. So that's how that works. The supply curve is, it intersects with that demand curve. It's upward sloping. The less I am going to be paid for doing my service, for my labor, the less I want to, less motivated I am to even provide those products or services. So in the case of producers, you pay me less and I'm going to provide less. I'm just not sufficiently motivated to do that. What can cause a shift in supply and a shift in demand? There's a lot of different things. Probably one of the more common examples in shift in demand is if through technology or through some innovation, we come up with a substitute good. So instead of sugar, you have a sugar alternative. Instead of gasoline, you have electric. And that'll shift demand, right? So instead of people buying gas-powered vehicles, you'll see an increasing demand for electric-powered vehicles. As far as the shift in supply, there could be a number of things that impact a shift in supply. And once again, that could be technology that impacts supply, competition. Also, we're looking at government regulations. If government starts to regulate industry so much that it is just not, it just makes zero sense to provide those services or goods, then businesses will just pull back and supply will diminish or decline. Marginal utility, when you talk about marginal utility, you aren't diminishing marginal utility, then you're talking about anything that when you're talking about marginal, each additional unit consumed or produced, in this case we're looking at utility, so each additional unit consumed has diminishing marginal utility. So the benefit is not as great the second time as it was the first time. It's not as great the second time it is, or the third time as it is the second time, and so forth. Everything is diminishing. The utility, the usefulness, the interest is diminishing. Moving on to standard 4. We're looking at comparing different market structures. So there are 4 different market structures. One is perfect competition. It does not exist. That's where you're talking about everything as a commodity. If I don't buy from you, there's 100 billion other people that sell the same identical product. Maybe a slightly different price, maybe less convenient, more convenient, but we're talking about the same identical products. That's under perfect competition. Next would be monopolistic competition. Now, monopolistic competition is a little bit confusing maybe for you because we're not talking about a monopoly, but a monopolistic competition is the next step beyond perfect competition. And this is where products distinguish themselves, or companies will distinguish their products by utilizing branding. And so no longer we're talking about a commodity, but we're talking about a branded good. So I'm going to go and buy this product because I prefer Coca-Cola. Or I'm going to buy this product because I prefer Pepsi. I'm attached to the brand. I'll pay whatever the price is for that particular brand. That's monopolistic. Only distinguished by branding. Okay? And then oligopoly. Oligopoly is where you have just a handful of large companies. Barriers to entry are too high. A simple example would be the automotive industry. There are just a handful of automobile companies. In Detroit now, we just have the Ford Motor Company and General Motors. And Chrysler, which was once one of the big 3 automobile companies, is no longer part of, it's not a U.S. company. It's owned by, I'm forgetting who owns it now, but it's not a U.S. company. Its parent company is in Europe. Now, that's a oligopoly. Now the monopoly, Monopolies are against the law, and that's why you do see, though, companies like Amazon, Facebook, Google, all under the scrutiny of Congress because of their monopolistic practices. They're eliminating choice. Barriers to entry are so high that there's just no way that anybody else can compete with them. Okay? Moving on to, the next logical topic is then antitrust law. So when you look at antitrust law, you need to know some basic antitrust law. Obviously, the reason why antitrust law exists is government does have an important role in a free market society to encourage competition. So we have laws in place like the Sherman antitrust law. And the Sherman antitrust law makes it prohibits companies from forming these monopolies. Old monopolies that used to exist were AT&T, as in Ma Bell, the older AT&T, Standard Oil Corporation. They used to be a monopoly, used to basically own every type of gas station that was, just under a different brand name. So there are laws against monopolies. The Sherman Antitrust, the Clayton Act. The Clayton Act is the law that says, the requirement that says if you want to have T-Mobile and Sprint merge, then those two companies must be examined by the Federal Trade Commission and to determine if that is going to in any way shrink competition. Okay, so the Federal Trade Commission has to determine that despite the fact that these two companies want to merge, there still can be some healthy competition. Apparently, they did approve it because we have the two companies being one now, T-Mobile. Moving on to standard number 5, and this we learn about different economic theory, economic philosophy, and you learn about Adam Smith, known as the father of capitalism and author of Wealth of Nations. And then you have John Maynard Keynes. And Keynes had some theories about how to stabilize the economy. And he believed that on occasion, government intervention, government stimulus is essential to get the economy back and running, because he feels that it would take much too long for the free markets on their own to recover. Karl Marx and Frederick Engels talks about they're the fathers of communism and socialism, if you will. They actually, I don't know if I could say I disagree with a lot of their thoughts. They had some concerns about capitalism. They felt that capitalists would be, they would exploit other people. They would be oppressive. They would unfairly charge, enormous prices. But I don't think you're going to see too many economies in the world today that really embrace full communism, socialism, so forth. We talk about mixed economies, and that's what you're really seeing. They are, when you think about Marxism, it is the type of economy that would be a command economy, centrally planned, centrally controlled. Now, it's much more efficient in many ways, but it has not proven to be the best economic theory. Okay? Modern day economists, Milton Friedman, a good example of a modern day economist, Milton Friedman, he really is an advocate for the free markets. He would say we should never have price floors, price ceilings. Price floors would be like minimum wage. Price ceilings would be like rent control. And he believes that you just need to let the free markets operate. Strand number 3, students will recognize fiscal and monetary policy. Simple thing to remember is fiscal policy are your budgets, taxing and spending. So government taxing and spending. Whether on the federal level, state level, or local level, fiscal policy is about policy, tax and spend policy. Monetary policy in the United States, that's our centrally controlled bank, or central bank. And that monetary policy is about interest rates. They have an objective. Chairman Jerome Powell is the chairman of the Federal Reserve. They are the ones, he leads a committee on monetary policy. It's the open market committee, and they are the 12 governors that do decide with the chairman about our monetary policies. They're concerned about interest rates, inflation, unemployment, or full employment. So there are things that they've got to be concerned about. And together, working with the government, the president, the Congress, between fiscal and monetary policy, they try to keep the economy going in a very positive trajectory. Okay. Moving on, we need to look at some taxes. How do we raise taxes? There are a couple different types of taxes. Remember that progressive taxes are taxes that are targeting towards the rich, the wealthy. Regressive taxes are those taxes like a sales tax, food sales tax, that is regressive, and those really kind of punish and unfairly tax lower income households. Okay. Then you have everything from property taxes, and those help pay for schools, and sales taxes, and some states have them, some don't. In the state of Utah, the all income tax is supposed to pay for education, and there are some that are advocating that it expands beyond that. But these are the different types of taxes. There are many. You got to understand the difference between progressive, which just in a nutshell, it's focused and targeted on the wealthy, and regressive, focused and targeted on taxing the poor. In Standard 2, we read about things such as the business cycle. And remember that business cycle has it's a cycle, right? So we have where we have expansion and growth, and the curve is going up, and we hit a peak, right? That's when the economy is just humming, and we have like full employment and low inflation, those type of things. And then we go back down, and we hit into decline, and we have this contraction happening. And then we could hit into the trough, and in that trough we could be experiencing either short-term downturn in the business cycle, and that's what we call a recession. But if that recession extends beyond 18 months, then we're going to call that, likely call that either a really, in the last example, 2008, the Great Recession, or we're going to move into a depression. Okay. Consumer Price Index, CPI, or Consumer Price Index, is the cost of a basket of goods. That's an index that we look at to see whether or not we are experiencing inflation or deflation. Remember how unemployment is calculated. We have to first determine who's part of the active workforce, who is actively seeking work. You have to be at least 16 years old, right, to be seeking work. If you're a student, you would not be in this actively seeking work. If you're part of the military, you're non-civilian, you're not going to be counted in that unemployment figure there as well. So we want to look at that. There's different types of unemployment: frictional, structural, cyclical, and seasonal unemployment. You could have seasonal unemployment as in this is the construction season and this is not a construction season, so you might have some people unemployed during the downtimes. This is the season where we pick the fruits and so forth, and we harvest. This is not a time, okay? And that's seasonal unemployment. You could have people that work at Lagoon and work at the park, but it's only open during a certain time of the year. Okay, that could be technically a seasonal type of unemployment. You need to understand the business cycles. So again, you have expansion, peak, decline, or contraction, and then we get into that trough, recession, or depression. The Federal Reserve, you need to understand how the Federal Reserve works and how one of the ways they can manage monetary policy, well, a couple of different ways, is they can expand or they contract the money supply based on interest rates. So lower interest rates means more money supply. People are interested in borrowing money. You can look at the Feds do manage the sales of Treasury securities, government securities, and so if they're selling securities, that means that they're as a result they're infusing more dollars into the marketplace, and then if they're buying securities, government securities, they're taking money out from the circulation there. Okay. Different ways that we, or the function of money. Let's talk about the function of money. Standard 4. Different ways that we exchange are through barter, credit, money, Bitcoin, that kind of thing. So electronic cryptocurrency is a newer way. 3 functions of money. Money, remember, is a medium of exchange. I want to buy this. It's a medium of exchange. A store of value. You pay me. I put it in the bank. And a measure of value. This is how much this costs. And we put those in dollars and cents. The characteristics of money. Money is durable, portable. It's easy to put that in your wallet and move around. It's easily divisible. It is relatively stable, and it is widely accepted. The U.S. dollar is the global currency. The value of money, what's the difference between a commodity and a fiat money currency? Fiat money is the printed dollars. And when we look at, we've got fiat money. This is fiat money, okay? And the reason why that fiat money has money, like the U.S. dollar is fiat money, is because the government stands behind it and says it has value. Whereas if you look at a commodity, that would be gold, silver. Those are commodities, and they have value too. But it's not like you go and buy your groceries with a bar of gold or anything like that, okay? Standard 5, examine the role of the entrepreneur. The role of the entrepreneur in an economy is to keep that economy humming, start new businesses, be innovative, manage resources wisely. That's the way I like to remember it. There are 4 factors of production. One is land or natural resources. One is labor or human resources. Another is capital. And then the 4th factor of production is entrepreneurship. That entrepreneur is the steward of all these other limited resources, the manager of all these other resources. And that's the role of entrepreneurs and entrepreneurship. Standard 5, also in Standard 5, we are looking at types of businesses. You have a sole proprietorship, one owner, a partnership, 2 or more owners, still have liability with sole proprietorships and partnerships. If you want to minimize liability, then you have to look at either a limited liability corporation, LLC, or a corporation. You got an S corporation, think of S as in small corporation, and a C corporation, a larger, more traditional corporation. That, at least when you think of Apple, Amazon, but not Microsoft and so forth, those are large corporations. So those are the different types. Usually people will look at incorporating if they want to minimize risk. If you're a sole proprietorship or partnership and something goes wrong, you can lose everything, okay, because you are fully liable here. In Strand 4, we talk about the standard of living. How do we calculate standard of living? We calculate first GDP, gross domestic product. Now GDP takes a look at everything the government produces or government purchases, individual or consumer purchases. It looks at the net export figures. So you take the net exports minus the net imports, and you get a net export, hopefully. And we look at our balance of trade. These all factor into our GDP, the value of all the products produced, okay, in any given year. That number, GDP, gross domestic product, we divide by the population, and we end up with what we call the GDP per capita. also known as a standard of living. Now, the GDP per capita, if you can imagine a large country like China, India, where populations are over 1 billion compared to our 300 million, when you have to take that as a denominator and divide your GDP by larger numbers, your GDP is not going to be as good as maybe our GDP with 300 something million people. So the GDP per capita in the United States today, I don't know, it's somewhere like 56,000, whereas in China it's 10, 12,000 or so. India, it's going to be lower than that, maybe 9,000, 8,000 for India, or even lower. I've heard as low as maybe 2,000. It's because of their large populations. That has to factor in. Standard of living, when you have a high GDP per capita, when you have freedoms, religious freedoms, if you have the ability, academic freedoms to go to school, get a good education, those all contribute to high standard of living. When you're looking at who has the highest standard of living, it's not the United States, but you see a lot of the Scandinavian economies have very high standard of livings. Also interpreted it as a happiness factor as well. Monaco would be an example of a place where a lot of wealthy people will go to, very high standard of living, but very, very small population. Okay. How do we increase standard of living? We improve productivity. Technology can improve productivity. That's why technology is generally a good investment in the stock markets, because it improves productivity, it improves GDP, or gross domestic product. In Strand 5, we have to learn about the impact and the changes happening in our global economy, what's happening with our imports and our exports. Why is the president levying tariffs? Are tariffs working? Think of tariffs as a type of tax on imports that we make. Who pays for those tariffs? And are they really good for our economy? Are we having a trade deficit? Yeah, with certain countries, we definitely have a trade deficit. So when you look at, and that's why the president gets unhappy with China, if we're importing more than we're exporting, we could have a trade imbalance, a trade deficit there. Standard 2, also we want to have free and open markets, ideally, right? A free market. Standard 2, use absolute advantage and comparative advantage to make your trade decisions. So in order to discuss absolute advantage and comparative advantage, you have to understand opportunity cost. So what is opportunity cost? It's the cost of your next best alternative. So my opportunity cost of becoming a teacher is, okay, what else can I do? If I could do something else and I can earn more money, or whatever that value of that alternative is that I didn't choose, that's my cost, opportunity cost. The opportunity cost of not studying with my friends for the test and rather going with other friends to go watch a movie, there's a trade-off, there's opportunity cost, and it's going to be, like in that example, going to be, you're probably going to lose, get a lower grade and so forth. So there is some cost. The production possibility curve is about how, because we have fixed resources, scarce resources, we've got to make some decisions, right? We're going to make some trade-offs. Do we plant the corn? Do we invest money in food, or do we invest money in military equipment, in education? And those are trade-offs, and we have something called a production possibility curve, because we can't do everything, and we've got to determine, do we plant corn? Do we plant beans? Do we plant zucchinis? Yes, zucchinis. That's production possibility curve. Now, the absolute advantage is where really nobody can compete against you. And so you have an absolute advantage. If you're Saudi Arabia and you're just pumping out oil left and right, you sort of have this absolute advantage. If you use a sports analogy, you could say, Lakers with LeBron and their bigs, they have an absolute advantage. Whereas a comparative advantage, you have to consider trade-offs, opportunity costs. Yes, we could produce in the United States our own pineapple. fact, we used to get a lot of our pineapples from Hawaii. I don't know how much pineapple now is produced in Hawaii. I know when I buy pineapples, a lot of times you'll see that it's from Costa Rica. And it's probably because Costa Rica has a comparative advantage. Okay, so their opportunity cost is lower for producing something like pineapples. That's comparative advantage versus absolute advantage. And there are going to be many examples of where we have discovered, right, it's cheaper for us. We can have our cars made in America, but the comparative advantage is to have cars manufactured in Mexico, in Canada, in China, in Japan. Sometimes makes it much more attractive and makes it more logical because of comparative advantages to outsource a lot of that to other countries. Finally, let's move down to strand 3 and 4, currency exchange rates. Right now, you look at the value of the dollar. Is the dollar strong? Is it a weak dollar? If it's a weak dollar, generally we're talking about it cannot buy as much in other currencies. So if we wanted to buy things in Europe and in the European Union, and we had to exchange the US dollar for the euro, you look at currency exchange and you're not going to find that we can buy as much, okay? And so traveling, it factors into traveling, because if you want to go to Canada right now, the US dollar versus the Canadian dollar or the loonie, you'll find that it is very favorable. And so you can go to Canada, as you've heard me tell stories, and get some pretty good deals, okay? A fraction of the cost of it would be in the United States. Same thing, you go down to Mexico. Right now, I think it's 1 to 20, as far as about 20 pesos or so. In China, it's about 7 yuan or RMB to the US dollar. So we look at these currency exchange when we're doing business, when we're traveling, when we're importing and so forth, and there may be some economic advantages to be had. Finally, discuss political systems and how the economies are changing things, the role of the United States in the global economy. The U.S. definitely participates in the global economy. Some can argue that because of our interactions with other countries through global trade, we reduce the likelihood of war. And I think, there's a debate about that either way. As far as the U.S., we do definitely want to have our say, just like China and Russia want to have their say. We do like to influence governments and policies. We would love if Cuba, right, were to become more of a democracy and move away from their ways of the past. But we can only have a certain amount of influence. And as you can see in our elections, other countries want to have influence on our country and mess things up. And so, and you see our politics, we're very divided on this. Some of the political persuasion, they want more a socialistic. And you have to understand it's not inherently bad or evil to be socialistic, but it is a different philosophy. It is a different model, essentially planned. It is more government involvement, more government regulations. Whereas the free market economies just say, let the consumer decide, let the markets decide. If we want to trade with some countries and we want to bring in products that maybe even you don't want to see, we just let the consumer decide. Free markets, and if you look at the one side of the politics is less regulation, free markets. The irony is that you have both that will start talking about tariffs, and tariffs is not a free market type of behavior. It is essentially planned, let's build walls type mentality. Hey, I think that is it. Yes, it is. I'm sorry that this has gone on long. Obviously, you see that there are more questions and there are more things to study. This is Mr. Liu. I am your 7-minute sensei saying good luck on the state exams.